Have you ever heard of the Third World? Can you tell me where it is? Serious question. Where's the Third World?
All over.
All over, okay. Any other thoughts? Sorry, Jean?
All around us.
All around us, okay. What about the First World?
Wasn't it originally the West, the Soviet Union, and everybody else?
There we go. Someone knows his history. Indeed it was. Exactly that, yes. Do you know who coined the phrase? No.
Churchill or someone, I expect.
No, it wasn't actually. Interestingly, it wasn't. No, it was Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, was the chap who came up with the phrase. And he talked about the First World, the Second World and the Third World. And it was exactly that. The First World was the US and Europe and Australia. The Second World was the USSR and all of its allies, part of the Cold War at that time. Interesting, as we're facing what we're facing now. But it was that was the Second World, and the Third World was what was left, Africa and India and South America in particular. And of course we then began to look at the fact that those poorest countries, poorest nations, poorest people were in the Third World. And that really seemed to stick then, didn't it? The term the Third World. We don't talk of the First World and the Second World anymore. We've lost track of what they are really. But the Third World, that term has stuck, and we still refer to the Third World, although we don't necessarily relate to it in the same way, but we do still refer to the Third World. But of course there is only one world, and some of you reflected that in your answers about the Third World is all around us. There is only one world. We should live together. We should live together in peace. We should share with one another. We should love one another. And we struggle in life with many things. We struggle with that concept when we see what is going on in our world today, of course. Very particularly at the moment, while we see at the moment those heart-wrenching images and stories coming out of Ukraine. And we know there are many other stories all around our world where there is not peace, where the world is not in harmony. We've already heard it alluded to this morning, but we are in the midst of Fairtrade Fortnight. Fairtrade Fortnight. It's about something about trying to make things better for people, trying to make a fairer world for people, a better world for people, about sharing together. If you want to know more about it, speak to Anne. She'll be there with the stall. She can sell you stuff as well while she's telling you more about it. But you can learn more about it. But their theme for Fairtrade Fortnight, choose the world you want. I'm sure all of us, the world we want is not what we see at the moment on our television screens. What can we do to play our part in making it a better world? Not just how we want it, but what God wants us to make it through his power, through the Spirit using us to make it a better world, a fairer world, more peaceful, more loving world. We're going to listen to God's word now as we listen to readings from the book of Exodus and Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth.
The reading this morning is from Exodus 34, verses 29 to 35. Moses goes down from Mount Sinai. When Moses went down from Mount Sinai carrying the 10 Commandments, his face was shining because he had been speaking with the Lord, but he did not know it. Aaron and all the people looked at Moses and saw that his face was shining, and they were afraid to go near him. But Moses called them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the community went to him, and Moses spoke to them. After that, all the people of Israel gathered round him, and Moses gave them all the laws that the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking to them, he covered his face with a veil. Whenever Moses went into the tent of the Lord's presence to speak to the Lord, he took the veil off. When he came out, he would tell the people of Israel everything that he had been commanded to say, and they would see that his face was shining. Then he would put the veil back on until the next time he went to speak to the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. May God bless it to us.
And the New Testament this morning is, as Martin said, from the second letter to the church at Corinth, beginning to read at chapter 3, I think, yes, and verse 12, and then continuing to chapter 4 to verse 5. So 2 Corinthians 3, verse 12. Because we have this hope, we are very bold. We are not like Moses, who had to put a veil over his face so that the people of Israel would not see the brightness fade and disappear. Their minds, indeed, were closed, and to this very day their minds are covered with the same veil as they read the books of the Old Covenant. The veil is removed only when a person is joined to Christ. Even today, whenever they read the law of Moses, the veil still covers their minds. But it can be removed, as the scripture says about Moses. His veil was removed when he turned to the Lord. Now, the Lord in this passage is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is present, there is freedom. All of us, then, reflect the glory of the Lord with uncovered faces. And that same glory coming from the Lord, who is the Spirit, transforms us into his likeness in an ever greater degree of glory. And chapter 4. God in his mercy has given us this work to do, and so we are not discouraged. We put aside all secret and shameful deeds. We do not act with deceit, nor do we falsify the word of God. In the full light of truth, we live in God's sight and try to commend ourselves to everyone's good conscience. For if the gospel we preach is hidden, it is hidden only from those who are being lost. They do not believe because their minds have been kept in the dark by the evil god of this world. He keeps them from seeing the light shining on them, the light that comes from the good news about the glory of Christ, who is the exact likeness of God. For it is not ourselves that we preach. We preach Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. Amen. This is the word of the Lord.
As I begin my sermon this morning, I want you, I hope, to try and have in your mind the idea, the concept of covenant. And I ask you to try and get this in your head, and I'm going to go through it a little bit to help you. I ask you to get this into your head to start with, because in our passage from 2 Corinthians, Paul is building his argument upon the idea of covenant. So I think it's important for us to have the concept of covenant in our minds as we begin. And thus it's equally important to understand something of what a covenant is. In some ways, a covenant is a bit like a New Year's resolution. Although in truth, this can only be said when it's viewed from a human perspective. For a covenant is also different to a New Year's resolution because it involves two parties rather than just one. And these two parties are typically God and humans. And when we look at the covenants that are recorded in the Bible, we naturally see, of course, that God always upholds his part of the covenant. But the people regularly, constantly fail to uphold theirs. And perhaps this is why that so many of the covenants that are described in the Bible are, as with so much that God offers, so much that God gives to us, unconditional. We can think of a few different examples. Think of the covenant with Noah. The covenant that God makes there is not to destroy all life again. One of the covenants with Abraham is to give land to him and his descendants. With David, it's to maintain the throne of David. With Israel, to forgive sins and establish a relationship with people through God's law being written on their hearts. A familiar thought that comes up again in the prophet of Jeremiah. These were unconditional covenants that God made with the people. But there were also those covenants that required something of the people that God made the covenant with. They were required to do something as well. Examples of those were with Abraham. There was the requirement on God for him to be Abraham's God and the God of his descendants. But for them to devote themselves to God, which was symbolized in circumcision for both Abraham and his folk, and then for the generations to come. And then later with the people of Israel, that for God it was to be Israel's God, protecting them, guiding them, caring for them. But for the people themselves, that they would be God's people, following his laws and serving his purposes. And it is these covenants, particularly the one made with Israel on Mount Sinai, that the people and the nation broke and turned away from time after time. We see this happening as we read through the Old Testament. We see it happening time and time again, that the covenants are made and they are broken by the people time and time again. And then we come to the New Testament and we come to the Gospels and we encounter the new covenant that replaces all others that have come before it. However, like those that have gone before, there is a symbolic sealing, a symbolic signing of the covenant. And like many of those, that symbol comes in blood. However, this time, that blood is not from an arbitrary sacrifice. It is from the one who makes the covenant. That is, from Jesus. So the blood this time does not come from a lamb or an ox or pigeons or doves or whatever it might be that to seal the covenant. This time it is the person making the covenant, Jesus himself, who gives his blood to seal the covenant. And of course he tells us that and tells the disciples that at that Last Supper on the Thursday night as he meets with them. So here in our passage from 2 Corinthians, Paul contrasts the old covenant in the law with the new covenant in Jesus Christ. He talks rather about the law. He speaks of the law being adhered to rigorously by people. He talks about the law being written. He talks about the law being head knowledge. He says it's an outward thing, that inner desires of people could be opposed to the law. He says that the law became what it was not meant to be. It became a hindrance to people. And that the law effectively killed life. That it didn't allow people to live their lives as it was meant to do. Lex and I were talking something about this the other day. The law was given so that people could have life. It's what Jesus said in the New Testament, I come so that you may have life in all its fullness. Actually, that's what the law was meant to do. We often look at the law as it's given in the Old Testament as something that was very restricting. But that's not what it was meant to be. It was meant to be something that gave you life. That if you followed the law, you were free. You actually were able to live. Because you didn't end up hurting people and hurting yourself. But actually you lived a free life. But in the end, because of the way people restricted themselves because of the law, they ended up killing their life and ended up being bound by it in a way that they weren't meant to be. Paul contrasts this with Jesus and says that Jesus is freeing. He brings freedom. Talks about this as well in his letter to the Galatians. That Jesus is spiritual, that after Jesus has ascended and comes through to people by his Holy Spirit, there's that spiritual knowledge, spiritual understanding, spiritual movement. That here, instead of the head knowledge that people have of the old law, which is something you know, you get it, you learn it, almost that learning by rote that we all used to do, here it's a heart knowledge, it's experience. It's something that is within, that one's inner desires lead one to want to obey. And because of all of this, the glory that comes through Jesus far surpasses the glory that comes through the law. The law can and does bring glory, but it pales in the light of the glory of Jesus. And this glory gives us hope, and the hope enables us to speak with boldness. So these things follow on one from another. And Paul then refers back to Moses as a comparison to show how the new is greater than the old. And in doing so, he refers to that passage that Anne read to us from. In that reading, we witnessed Moses receive the two stone tablets of testimony on which were written the Ten Commandments, receives them for the second time. For remember that he'd smashed them the first time round because of the golden calf. He'd received the tablets of stone when he'd gone to meet with the Lord and come down. And because he'd been gone so long, the people of Israel had got upset and worried and didn't know what to do. So they'd made the golden calf. And Moses lost his temper and smashed the tablets of stone. And so at some point later, he was able to go up and meet God again and get a new set of tablets. And this is that time. He comes down with the new tablets. But on both occasions, he'd gone up the mountain and had entered into God's presence in order to receive the law. And when he returned from the mountaintop, his face shone because the glory of God was reflected in him, because he had met with God's presence. And this glow that reflected off of him caused the people to fear when they saw him. When he came back down the mountain, this glow shone from him. They were frightened. And in many ways, this was a right reaction, because God himself had said only a little while before that no man can see me and live. Remember that when Moses went and met with him, he didn't meet with God face to face. God just would pass by, and Moses would see what was passing by when he met with God. So they were frightened by what they saw in Moses' face. So on subsequent occasions, after Moses had related God's commands to the people, he would cover up his face with a veil until the next time he went to meet with God. And as we read the passage from Exodus at first glance, we perhaps assume that Moses is covering his face in order to help allay the fear of the people. But Paul makes it clear that's not what he's doing at all. That's nothing to do with it. He tells us that Moses covered his face so that people wouldn't see that glow faded. Moses didn't want people to see that after a little while, the glow faded in him. Because maybe then they would have begun to doubt him, to worry that he didn't perhaps have the authority that he once had. Because, well, look, it's that wonderful figure he was with the glow of God. Look at him now. Here we are a week later. Look, he's a bit normal, a bit ordinary, isn't he? So Moses covered up so that they didn't see that glow disappear. And then when he went to see God again, he'd take the veil off, meet with God, and come back, and the glow would be there. This is where Paul makes his comparison. He states that just as the glory that shone from Moses' face was temporary, so the glory of the old covenant was also temporary. However, he says, in contrast, our glory, the glory that comes through Jesus, does not fade. Paul then moves on to make another point using the analogy of the veil. He makes the point that not just Moses literally, but also the people figuratively became veiled. And this veil, the old law, has managed to obscure the true promise that it held. This is demonstrated through the fact that the Jews cannot see or accept Jesus for who he has been revealed to be, for who he really is, the one who was promised, the Messiah. The Old Testament should point people to Jesus, but the veil that is over their mind's eye prevents them from seeing this truth. It's only through Jesus that this veil can be lifted. Only through personal contact with Jesus can one truly understand and see who he really is. Only through the Spirit that Paul talks about in that Corinthians passage that can we really understand and fully be enlightened to what we're being told. But also in other ways we can have a veil. And the question for us is, do we have a veil? If we do, it might take various forms. Do we have a veil of prejudice, where we perhaps use the scriptures to support our argument or our position on something? Do we have a veil of wishful thinking, where we find what we want to see in the scripture and then ignore the rest that's all around it? Do we have a veil of partial thinking, where we don't take the Bible as a whole and look at the whole picture of what the Bible says to us? These are dangers that we can slip into when we look at scriptures and we find passages that we like, or we find verses that we think, yes, that speaks to me, but we don't look at the wider span of what scripture says. The final verse from our Corinthians reading is an important one, I think, to spend a few moments briefly just looking at. It says, "For what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake." This verse should be heard as a reminder and a warning to us all. For our focus as Christians, as those who profess to follow Jesus, the focus of our lives should be to honour and glorify him in and through all we do. Our aim should never be to make ourselves the focus. That task can be trickier for some than for others. For some folk have natural gifts that can draw attention to themselves. Others are called into or placed into positions and roles that calls them to become a focus for people's attention. But the thing to remember is that the gift given to us, or the role placed upon us, is not done so for our own glory. We're not meant to build ourselves up, nor to place ourselves on a pedestal. We are to use our gift, our role, for glorifying Christ and glorifying him alone. And we are to remember that we are all servants of one another, having first ensured that we are servants of our Saviour. So where do we go from here? Well, we are to rejoice in the freedom that Jesus gives us through his Spirit and not be bound by the law. For the law is second best. Not that it's wrong, but it's second best. And as one commentator says, the second best is the worst enemy of the best. This freedom should not lead us into anarchy. Instead, it should lead us to want to do God's will. For he is the one who has in Jesus set us free. And thus it is that we serve God first and each other second, always seeking to show the love of God in our actions. And so in all we do, may we seek to serve God and one another, and thereby be a blessing to one another. Amen.